Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar. We're very happy to have you all here today. We are going to be discussing leading things you didn't start. During this webinar, I'll just go through some of the housekeeping things here. We do encourage you to use the chat options and the Q&A options to connect with other attendees, share your thoughts on what's being presented, or as always, ask your questions. I know that there are some people who have some very good questions out there, and we'll make sure that we've already been receiving some questions beforehand, and we'll make sure that those all get covered. Please note that if we do discuss any resources or anything like that, we will provide links in the webinar page once this is posted. You can check that out at churchfacilitiesexpo.com, and we'll be happy to make sure that you have everything you need there. And as always, a recording of today's webinar will be shared with each of you in a few days. Okay, so it is my pleasure today to introduce to you Tyler Reagin. Tyler is a very good friend of ours here at CFX, and we are very excited to have him do a webinar for us. It's the first time you've done one with us, right, Tyler?
I think so.
Yeah. So he is the founder and CEO of the Life-Giving Company. He's the author of The Life-Giving Leader, and he also has a second leadership book due out just in a few days, really. And that's what he's going to be talking about today, leading things you didn't start. He was the president of Catalyst, and prior to that, he served for 7 years under the leadership of Andy Stanley as the service programming director of Browns Bridge Community Church, which is one of the North Point Ministries campuses. He received his Master's of Divinity from Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, and he serves as a leadership coach for teams and organizations. Tyler, we are so happy and honored to have you join us today. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks for having me.
Mm-hmm.
You and me get started?
Go for it.
All right. A huge thank you. Stephanie's become a good friend, and CFX is an organization that I just get excited about the idea of how do we serve facilities, production, the technical sides of things. I've spent 20 years in that space, and just grateful to Ron and Stephanie for the way in which they've been leading out and trying to serve that community best, and continue to serve pastors and decision makers so that we understand that what we pull off on Sunday, if the experience getting to there and the space is not great and the way that we handle security and all the elements that come with it are not handled well, we could lose influence before we ever even get them to the main message we're trying to get them to. So September event is supposed to be live in Dallas. You got to join us. Again, you can go to the website and find out more about that. So yeah, Stephanie mentioned this guy I'm holding, and actually it's weird to actually hold a book in your hand that you've been working on. Leading Things You Didn't Start comes out March 2nd, so a week from tomorrow. And if you've ever experienced something like this, it's an overwhelming amount of gratitude, but I also just get overwhelmed with the idea that any human would actually buy something that I've created. That still kind of blows my mind. So I'm just grateful for that, grateful to have a chance to do that and be a part. So a couple things. I'm just going to dive into this, and this is literally just scratching the surface on the subject matter. And I just would pray and ask that if it scratches enough of the surface and you want to hear more, I'm going to give you obviously a lot more practical and a lot more thoughts. One of the things that's really cool about this, and I think one of the things I was most excited about, was the last 4 chapters are case studies. They are leaders in different spheres. So I've got a men's Division I basketball coach. I've got a pastor who took over for his dad or his mom and dad. I've got Cheryl Batchelder, who was the CEO of Popeyes, and then Jim Daly, who took over Focus on the Family. But 4 leaders in different spaces who have done exactly what we're talking about, leading things you didn't start, and what they learned and what they liked and what they didn't like and things that they could grow from. And so I think those are worth the price of admission alone, but hopefully some of the stuff I wrote would be helpful to you too. So it came back for me, this all came from a really unique experience. I'd been working with Andy Stanley for a long time. He obviously was involved at Catalyst, but I had started producing Catalyst as a contractor. and would, for about 2.5 years, I would just go to the 3 big events and pull those off and produce those. And then they asked me, Brad Lomenick asked me if I would come over and be the creative director full time and develop our staff. Because as you'll hear me talk, I love leadership coaching. I love executive coaching. I believe the church should be the best run organization on the planet, and that's not always the case. I also believe that very few people walk away from Jesus and the faith because of Jesus, but they walk away because of poor leadership in the church. And so that's kind of my life stuff. I love it. I believe in it. So I went over to Catalyst. And then after being there about a year, just through the seasons and what happens in transition, next thing I know, I'm being handed the keys to a national platform that had been started about 15 years before that by John Maxwell, small voice in the leadership forum. I'm just kidding. He's a godfather in so many ways to the leadership space, and as a believer and former pastor, John's just been a mentor to so many of us. But he started Catalyst to reach the next generation, and Andy Stanley was a part of that from day one. So now I'm being handed the keys to this thing that I didn't start, that 3 guys had led as the director prior to me, that had legacies on the line of John Maxwell and Andy Stanley and other great leaders that you've heard. And I remember very clearly the difference from leaving on that Friday when I wasn't the boss to turning around and driving in on Monday. Now, for some of you, it didn't happen like that. It was just, you're at a new church, you're at a new place, you're at a new team, and you just drove in. You didn't have an existing thing. For me, it was, wow, I just went from being a peer to some people to all of a sudden their boss overnight. And I remember driving in thinking, where can I pull from on this? Like, what resources would help me? And I started looking around. There's just not a lot out there. Now, there is a ton. There are a million resources on entrepreneurship and startup, but very few on this idea of, well, the leadership required when you step into an inherited team, into a space that you didn't start, it's just different. And how long do you honor the past? Well, what do I change? How long do I wait to change? What does that look like? And in the faith-based space, there's even a few other layers about spiritual authority and spaces like that. So I just decided a few years ago, you know what? I didn't have much of a resource there, and I tried to figure it out the best way I could. But I really believe that we are called to lead well in these times of transition. And there are going to be some issues. And when you're in ministry, when you inherit a team and some of the team players are on the wrong bus, that's hard, right? Because it's not only just employees, but it's ministry, and this is their church and all these other things. We're just going to try to talk about that at a high level today. Now, and again, I'm going to just kind of start at the beginning and whet the appetite. Hopefully, I'm going to give you the 4 kind of main steps to the process, but I'm only going to go into the first one to a little bit of a depth. But here was a few questions that were coming to mind as I was driving in that day. And so if you're listening, these might resonate with you a little bit. But I was just thinking, what in the world, God, are you up to? Like, what are you doing putting me at? Do I have what it takes? I wrestled with that question a lot. Do I really want to take over something that so many people loved? Because if people love something, they have opinions about it. Add public national conversation to it, and now you've got a lot of opinions about it. Is there a secret sauce to doing what the leaders before me did? Like, what were they great at? What made them great at their job in this role? And I had fears too. Like, what if it doesn't grow under my leadership? What if, why am I scared? Why am I excited? Like, all these emotions, right? How in the world do I get the current team on board with my leadership? One of the things I loved about Buzz Williams' case study in the back of the book, he was at Texas A&M. He's the head basketball coach there. When I interviewed him, he'd only been there for about 100 days, and it was the 4th time he had stepped into a team that he didn't recruit, a team that didn't sign up for him, a team that now has to embrace new culture that he has to figure out some way to get them on board with or make a change. And I just felt like, man, his insights on that were invaluable. But we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But how do I get them on board? Is everyone on the bus, on the right seat on the bus? I don't know. Are they supposed to be on this bus? Like, I've always said to my team, I want you on the right seat on the bus, even if it's not my bus, because I want leaders to flourish. And if they're in a bad seat on the wrong bus, they're not going to flourish. What do I do if I don't like how certain things have been done in the past? asking that question. How do I honor the past without being trapped in the past? Uh, this one's personal for me, but what if they don't think I'm as funny as I know I am? I don't know. I just threw that one out there for you guys. How do I lead with confidence and authority, but also have authenticity? Like all this dance, it's a dance. We've got things that we have to pay attention to. And here's the biggest question I had: God, am I really who you want to lead this? Now, I'd already said yes. I'd already prayed through it. I was already in that seat. But at the end of the day, if I was honest with myself, the question I was wrestling with is, am I really the guy to do this? And we'll talk a little bit about that. So here's just a few. If you're wondering, well, okay, how is this different than leading something you start? Well, as I was looking at resources, and I was thinking, okay, there's a bunch of resources on startup and entrepreneur, as I mentioned. And then I made this number up. But if I were to guess out of my friends and my little circle of influence, 90% of us never start something from scratch. I mean, it feels like about right, maybe more, but very few actually start something. Most of us inherit something, whether it's a team, whether it's we go to a job where the person before us was either loved or hated. Well, maybe it's a team that when you come into, or a place, even if it's an entry level position, there's an expectation that's placed on you. Like, well, that's okay. Because when you start something over or start something from scratch, you don't have that. So some of the big differences are, when it's something new, you get to decide how it looks. When you inherit it, someone else already decided how it should look, right? When it's brand new, you create the expectations. When it's something you inherited, there are spoken and unspoken expectations. They're handed to you. When it's brand new, you get to choose the people. When it's inherited, someone else recruited that team. When it's brand new, no one has decided whether you're doing a good job yet or not. That's a nice win. Thumbs up for that. That's worth starting something new just for that. But when it's inherited, some people are going to love what you do and some aren't. Okay, that's different. When it's brand new, fear is usually more of the unknown. What happens if this doesn't work? What happens if this doesn't take off? What if that team member? What if that new person? What if that money doesn't come in? If it's inherited, fear is more of what's known. Like, it's more of, what am I going to do about this situation? I mean, it's just a different dichotomy that we're facing here when we're talking about new things versus inherited things. I think one of the last ones I would say is, when it's new, you can't be compared to the old leaders. You can't be compared to, that's how we always do it. When it's inherited, you're always compared with others, and you're critiqued by what you do and how they did it. And I just remember, for me, this was really personal. I was just like, because I was following some really good leaders, and who were really good leaders, but very different than me. And we're going to talk a good bit about that as we move into this. So I want to read something to you. And I remember talking to my agent and my friend about this. And I said, when I think about this, there's one scripture and there's one principle in scripture that has really informed me, given me direction, and given me an understanding that I think sometimes we overcomplicate this. If we could simplify this for people, and I think the scripture does this, and this is not a scripture that you're like, whoa, I've never heard that. It's from Galatians 5. I'm going to read that to you. It's the fruit of the Spirit. But I love this too, because in the chapter on the fruit of the Spirit, or in this section, it always starts with verse 16. But I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. And it goes into just what's the difference between the flesh and the Spirit. But listen to this. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things, there is no law. I want you to put yourself, maybe you're in this situation right now, but I want you to back out for a second and go, okay, let's say you have a new team member joining your team tomorrow. They're joining on a Tuesday, not sure why, but let's say they're joining tomorrow. And I told you that in the first 60 days, that new team member is going to display 6 of the fruit of the Spirit. They're going to be loving. They're going to be gentle. They're going to be kind in the way they interact with people. They're going to be self-controlled. They're going to be full of joy. I've lost count on number, but you understand what I'm saying. If I told you they would display those fruit, I would bet that you would be plenty happy with how they've onboarded and engaged in your new team, right? And I know that sounds simple. You're like, well, it's got to be more complicated than that. Does it? In the book, we're going to talk about there's 4 steps. It's called the EPIC plan. It's evaluation, patience, implementation, and care. And we're going to talk about those for a minute. But patience, although one of the fruit of the Spirit, I can't even put it in that list. I have 3 chapters specifically on the patience required when you inherit something you didn't start. But I just really believe, and I've watched this happen, when new members join the team, or maybe it's you, but it's easier for you to see this in other people right now. When new people join the team and they display kindness and gentleness, and they are joyful and they're peaceful people, we're winning. Like, they've done a great job. And now I want you to take that and go, am I doing those things? Am I stepping into those spaces with very simple things? I love what Matthew 7 says. You will recognize them by their fruit, because every healthy tree bears good fruit. Look, I'm not trying to over spiritualize this, and I'm not even trying to oversimplify it, although I kind of want you to simplify it. What if the easiest and the first thing that we focus on when we step into space that we didn't start was displaying the fruit of the Spirit? Now, Tyler, this is a business book. What are you talking about love for? Are you kidding me? I believe this with all my heart, you cannot be a great leader until you recognize that every person you come eyeball to eyeball with is a person of value. They matter because they matter to God. And until you do that, you're never going to be a great leader. That's just my own personal belief about it. But that is so critical. And so the fruit of the Spirit, one, they're not natural. So that's why it's important that they are fruit of the Spirit and that you're walking in the Spirit. But 2, they are just life-giving to the people around. And if you're a new leader and you're taking over a team that had a boss, whether they loved them or they hated them, but you come in displaying kindness and gentleness, patience, peace, love, self-control, I'm following you. I might not even believe that you have all what it takes from a skill set perspective, but if you're going to take care of me like that, I'm in, and I'm going to follow you. It is just so simple. So here's the truth. When you step in to lead something you didn't start, you will either transition in a healthy way or you won't. And this is your chance to gain influence from the moment go. But it's also your chance to lose influence if you don't handle it well. I remember a leadership guy named Sam Chand used to say that stress is going to relieve itself. Either you choose where it goes or it chooses. And when it chooses, you lose. I believe that about this. If you don't handle transition leadership well, you really could start yourself in a hole that might not ever get to climb out of. So I believe start with fruit. I live in Georgia. Georgia's been my home state for a long time, other than the few years I lived in Boston for seminary. But the peach state is what Georgia is called. And if you ever hold a peach, well, we used to go to Lake House growing up, and we would pass these groves of peach trees. And they are like the most unassuming plant and tree like on a planet. Like I've been in South America plenty of times where I see like banana trees, and I'm like, wow, that's cool. A peach tree is like, wah, wah. It's kind of a letdown. Even a peach itself is kind of like, even though it's fuzzy, it's kind of like whatever. But when you taste it and it's fresh, it's unbelievable how good it is. And here's the thing about leadership and the fruit of the Spirit, or even just bearing good fruit. That marks me, that leaves me in a good place. That's giving me something that gives me a positive feeling. It leaves something positive on me. Same thing is for your leadership. You can either leave negative on people, that they have a bad taste in their mouth, they just tasted some bad fruit, or you can leave really good fruit. And really good fruit, and people that display really good fruit, they tend to win and they tend to gain influence versus losing influence. If you bring someone on and they display the fruit of the Spirit, I'm just going to say it one more time. We are starting on the right foot. All right. So here's your question. You're going, okay, yeah, I hear that, Tyler. Great. Thumbs up. We got the scripture part out of the way. Now, but it's a mess. The thing I inherited, it's got a toxic culture. I got team members that are just a pain in my neck. They're never going to get on board, I don't think. No one actually likes me because they love the leader before that person left. And now I'm just trying to clean it up a little bit. Here's what I would say to you: bear fruit. Okay, but there's got to be more. Yeah, there is more. But if you could put one deep thing in anchor your soul in this leadership moment, bear much good fruit. Okay, now we're going to move on to some practical stuff. Okay, I know it's like great with the sermon. Let's get practical. This is honestly maybe one of the most practical things I could teach you that I just talked about, is bearing good fruit. But one last thing before we get into the practical: you can't be the person you're replacing. You have to fight to be you. My first book, The Life-Giving Leader, is all about the concept of leading from your truest self. And here's what I wrestled with when I stepped into Lead Catalyst. Is my skill set good enough for this job? Is my pedigree, my background, my education, my family background, my financial understanding, whatever the thing may be that's insecure in you right now, is that going to be enough? And what does the person before me have that I don't have? And what did they do great? And all these kind of things that swirl in your mind. But I'm telling you right now, you were not called to that job to be them. And the quicker you can come in and be yourself while bearing fruit, while putting some of these other things in play, the quicker I believe you're going to gain influence as you go. In the first book, I talked about this example, and this is why I bring it up. It's really important as we start this conversation. There was a hospice nurse in Australia. Her name was Bronnie Ware. And Bronnie, for 7 years, she would ask people on their deathbed, she would say, "What is your biggest regret in life?" And there wasn't, like, if we were all sitting around together right now and we were like, "Well, I worked too much, or I traveled too much, or I didn't get to enough ball games, or what, I didn't make enough money," whatever the thing may be. There wasn't even a close second. There wasn't even the number one answer by far of people on their deathbed, their biggest regret in life was, "I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself and not the life others expected of me." Wow. Leaders, if we don't learn from the dying that their biggest regret after years and years of trying to do whatever it is they did, that by far the overwhelming majority regret was that they lived a life others expected of them and not something true to themselves. Here's the moment in your life that you have a chance, because everything is going to be pulling you to be either exactly like the leader who is loved that you're following, or the complete opposite of the leader who is hated that you're following. Or maybe there's a lukewarm somewhere in the middle of that. But nonetheless, being you is the most important thing that can happen in this situation. Learning to lead from your truest self. I remember when I was when I went into sixth grade, we had changed schools. And I just thought, and this is obviously really a smart understanding or principle that I grabbed a hold of, was this is, if there's ever a chance for me to kind of change it up a little bit, be something else, be something different than what I've been for the first, 5-6 years of school, this is the time. And so going into sixth grade, I made a full-on change, and it started with sun in my hair that summer. And if you remember sun in, and it turned my hair completely red, not bleach blonde, which I thought it was going to do. I wore tight roll khaki pants that were pleated, and the socks would match my button down shirt. Man, I was crushing. I had the bass shoes with the little twirly, shoestrings. And I mean, if there was ever a time for the ladies to think like, this guy is going to go somewhere, this was it. But here's the problem with it, is it just wasn't me. Like, at the end of the day, I just didn't feel like myself. And you can just put that on for so long. But I'm telling you, leaders, if you step into something you didn't start and you try to be somebody you're not, you are going to be exhausted. It's going to be hard enough. Add that layer on it, and I just don't think it's a recipe for success. And I want you to be successful when you do this. This one other illustration is, when I took over at Catalyst, I remember for about 1.5 years when I would go out and I would speak on behalf of Catalyst, or I would do these workshops or leadership trainings, or just speaking at churches and whatever, I would get kind of like Stephanie did, just read this list of bio type things. And I remember one of the first things out of my mouth every time I would say, I would do some sort of joke about the fact that I don't even know how I got to sit in the seat that I'm sitting in. I don't even understand why God would take a guy like me from where I came from and put me in a seat of authority and leadership over a place like this. And I basically just made fun of. Now, if you can't tell by just this conversation, humor is my defense mechanism. I'm self-deprecating specifically because I'm like, I don't know what to do. What do I do with my hands, right? So I would struggle with that. And for a year and a half after taking over, I struggled with that. And I kept going, almost like I just needed to apologize that I'm sitting in this position, that God's got a sense of humor. And one of the things I wrote in this new book is just this simple phrase: when we mock the position, we forfeit the ignition. And the reason I say that is when I mock the fact that I'm sitting in the position, I'm giving up the right for this thing to be a catapult, an igniting thing in my career, in my life, and in others' lives. At the end of the day, I was dishonoring God's call in my life. I love how Paul, at the beginning of almost every single letter, he says, I, Paul, an apostle appointed by God. That is not arrogance. That is confidence and calling. Instead of me getting up and going, well, God has a sense of humor, what if I got up and said, I'm so grateful that God has partnered with me and put me in a position to get to serve you like this? Well, you'd probably follow me more in that situation. You'd probably be interested in what I have to say. When we mock the position, we forfeit the ignition. Let's not do that. Stop mocking the appointment that God has for you, although it's hard, although it's fearful, although you're not as liked as the first guy or the first girl, whatever the case may be. Let's stop mocking that. And let's accept God's goodness for you, that he has plans to prosper you even when you're scared, that he has plans to grow you even when you make mistakes, that he has plans to work through you and not in spite of you, that he has plans to teach you something now so that you can be dependent on him as you lead, that he has plans to reach others because of the specific wiring he's put in your life and in your makeup. What if we just embrace those things? That'd be cool. I think we'd have an army of leaders that are ready to go, a bunch of leaders who have taken over things they didn't start and who have life in them, who are fired up about it and believe that maybe, just maybe, they were actually called to do that. But that's all precursor to just some practical understandings. So I mentioned this before. I call it the epic plan. We're going to spend a few chapters in the book on evaluation, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit about right now. Patience is 3 chapters of this. There's a song by Hillsong Worship. It's a Christmas song. It's called Seasons. And I remember the first time I ever heard the song, I just started crying because I was in a really interesting season. And in the bridge, there's this little line, and the line says, God, if you're not done working, then I'm not done waiting. And the whole song is about seasons and seeds and how, even though they don't come up immediately, like they're growing while we don't see them. But that line, if you're not done working, I'm not done waiting. I'm just going to I'm going to give you a little bit of a prophetic, if you will, looking forward. If you're new to a place that you didn't start, it's going to take longer than you think to be able to move some things down the field. Or you can try to accelerate them in a way that's unhealthy and you lose influence. Now, let me just add one thing. There are definitely ships that are sinking that people take over, and you got to do some massive radical things from day one. I get that. But most of us, the ship's not going down. Most of us, we're trying to get the people on the ship on board with where we're going in the next season. And so being patient will literally be one of the most incredibly important principles that you can hold on to. Implementation, we spend a few chapters specifically talking about now what? Now that we've evaluated everything, now that we've got some patience as we walk through this, and now we're going to implement culture, vision, modeling. What does that look like? And then the fourth part of the process is called care. John Maxwell always says, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Listen, if there's ever a season in your leadership where you caring for people has to rise above and have every single other principle laid on, this is it. If you go into a new team and they don't believe you care for them at the end of the day, it is going to be almost impossible to get them on board. And honestly, I've watched this happen. Just show a little care and you'll be crazy surprised, at how accelerated and how quickly people get on board with your leadership. So those are the 4 things. I can't give them all away because then you're not going to buy the book. No, I'm just kidding. But I want to talk specifically about evaluation as we walk into this. And then I've got some questions that have already come in. We're going to answer those. And then if you have some more questions that we're not going to get to, like if you're like, talk about implementation, I'm not really going to get there in the rest of this webinar. So if you have a question there, go ahead and ask. So one of the biggest things that comes up when you step into something you didn't start is, how long do I honor the past before I get trapped by the past? Now I'm going to be real transparent on this, as if I haven't already. So I remember year 5, this is not a joke. I wish it was. I'm embarrassed to even tell you. But year 5 of Catalyst West, of me being the boss or in charge, was the first time that I felt like I didn't have to do any more honoring, that I had already done that. It was the first time that I wasn't in the back of my mind kind of thinking about the people that had gone before me and how they did it and what other people might be thinking about. 5 years. Too long. However, we have to honor the past, good, bad, and indifferent. If you come in and you don't honor at least a little bit of what's been handed to you, and by honor doesn't mean you have to go on and on and on and fake it. I'm just saying, you just have to recognize that it was a thing, and you just can't act like it wasn't a thing. Good, bad, or indifferent. One of the things I like to say in the book is, if you don't honor what's been successful, you lose your ability to be influential. Celebrate what you've seen. And that goes into the second thing. But before I get to the second one, I talk about emotional intelligence all the time. And a lot of emotional intelligence is built off the foundation of self-awareness, right? When you're honoring the past, it's kind of like EQ for this moment. It's like having emotional intelligence for what you're inheriting. In other words, I'm aware. So when I go into a first meeting with a team, showing awareness of what they've been through, good and bad, of what they care about, good and bad, that you've done your homework, that you recognize this is a hard shift, that you recognize for this person, that was their favorite leader ever, and they came to church because of that person, or that this, like, it's just being aware so the team knows that you know. There's nothing worse than a leader coming into an inherited space and them acting like nothing's happened prior to them being in that room. You can't do that. You will lose influence from the very beginning. And I know some of you are like, yeah, but how do I honor? It was a freaking mess that I inherited. Like, what in the world am I supposed to do in that scenario? I'm just telling you, if you don't honor at least the fact that there is history, you're going to lose influence. So the second thing I would do after you start figuring out how to honor the past without being trapped by it is then you have to choose what to honor. All right. So what are the right things? Because here's the other thing. When and how you celebrate the past leaders and the successes will create a baseline for what is going to be allowed and celebrated in the future. Let me repeat. I want to read that again. When and how you celebrate the past leaders and the successes will create a baseline for what is going to be allowed and celebrated in the future. It's like my kids. If my kids actually make the bed without me having to tell them, that's a win-win-win. And I'll celebrate that. And when I celebrate that, it reinforces this is what I believe is healthy, good behavior for a child, or for any of us. You all need to make your bed, by the way, if you're wondering about that. It's just part of that. We have to honor and celebrate what we want modeled in the future. When you're celebrating, let's celebrate the things that we want replicated in the future. The third thing I would say is now we want to start shifting the focus. We've honored the past. We recognize there's awareness to this, that, and the other. Don't even like, hey, I know that financially this place has not been great the last few years. Here's what I'm hoping to do about that. We've got to start going. But again, if you just start here, you've lost influence along the way because people want to know that you know where they've been. They also want to know if you're following a leader who was retiring or who got promoted or who absolutely was one of these team leaders that people love. That's hard because you're like, yeah, I mean, are they going to like me as much? Honor them, but recognize you're never going to be them and let these people know that. And then start going, here's some of the things I'm excited about. Now, I remember specifically when I was doing this at Catalyst, I remember Brad just saying, hey, tell us what you think we should go. And I remember making this one statement. and I said to the team, hey, when I'm talking about where we're going, I'm not going to be referring to where we've been because we've already done that. I'm just saying this is where we're going. And when I say where we're going and it's different than where we've been, that is not a reflection of whether or not I believe with the decisions that were made then, or if I thought they were good, bad, or indifferent. It doesn't matter. At this point, we're not looking back. We've already done that. We're looking forward. And so I want to shift focus so that you can see where we're going and why. The fourth thing you got to do once you start shifting focus is you've got to cast a compelling vision of where you're going. It's not just enough to say, we're going to go over here. It's got to be compelling. My old boss used to say, Andy Stanley, he said, this is what he said about vision. The greatest motivator of change is a crystal clear picture of what the future should look like. I'll read it again. The greatest motivator of change is a crystal clear picture of what the future should look like. That's our jobs as leaders. And man, is it that much more important when you stepped into a space you didn't start. You've got to cast a compelling vision of where you're going. Now, some of you are probably like me, where there are days that people need vision from me, and I'm like, I ain't got it. I don't even know, I don't even know what's happening tomorrow. I'm just trying to do this well. I'm trying to take care of what I've been handed. Vision. Well, leaders, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you got to find something somewhere. You got to dig deep on this one. If that's your prayer life, if that's getting on a motorcycle and going and riding outdoors, whatever the thing may be that can spark vision in you. But I guess the best way to think about that is going, what would be best for the people if we went to where? Like, in other words, like, what is the thing that grows the business, grows the church, grows the organization while taking these people in a life-giving manner? That could probably be a simple question for you to ask to just try to get some vision stirring around in you. And then finally, and I know this is, you might feel like I'm talking in circles a little bit, but finally, after you have honored the past, you then started to celebrate the right things. Then you've shifted the focus a little bit. Then you start casting a compelling vision. Finally, you have to move on from honoring. How long is that? I don't know. I'm not sure. Everybody's different. I told you, 5 years, I still had this little voice. Now, if I'm real practical, I probably for a good 18 to 20 months, every time I was publicly speaking, I would honor the past. But there comes a point, and again, I probably erred on the side of honoring too long, which I would still choose that. I would choose to honor before dishonor. But you still got to be real. But here's why I call it a dance. It's the dance of discernment. How quickly do I move forward? How quickly do I do this? But you just kind of have to realize I can't go full bore, charging in, taking over the land. It doesn't work that way. It's very much a dance. Okay, I'm gonna push. Oh gosh, there was a lot of, and it doesn't mean if there's resistance that you're wrong. I'm just saying there's a dance. Take your time. There's a million other elements to successful inheritance. There just is. But this is a start. Again, that's just the first couple of chapters are talking about evaluation. What am I stepping into? How in the world do I honor this? What if people celebrated in the past? These are the things. But here's a thought for this, and then we're going to kind of do some Q&A and see what else we got going on if you guys have other questions. But the first book, I just wrote a simple phrase that really guided the whole book. And it was, when life flows, influence grows. When life flows, influence grows. So if you want a checklist of do this, 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 and this to make sure I'm successful inheriting, we're going to give you some of that. There's some practical stuff. But at the end of the day, the checklist needs to be pretty simple. Display the fruit of the Spirit by having life flow from you to those you lead. And I'm just telling you, if you care for and love people well, you will be successful in this season. If you are thinking, how do I do this and move a group of people forward? I care for them. That's what I do. And so give life to the people you lead. That's what you do. Last year, I had the privilege of stepping in as the interim director of service programming, which is the world I came from, for a church. And this team that I inherited had been led by a leader for about 14 years. And honestly, maybe one of the more difficult leaders I've followed, or at least tried to help serve the team afterwards. Just toxic, like unhealthy, insecure, and really led from a very fearful place. And but also had just bad direction, no real good leadership of just the competencies and the skills required for that team. But I knew when I went in that this wasn't rocket science. I knew that there was a great group of people who were committed to the mission, they were committed to the purpose, they were doing great work, or they were part of great work. But what I knew more than anything is this team needed to be cared for. Like, and again, you're going to hear me go, really? This is all so simple. Well, there's plenty of complicated, but why do we overcomplicate this? So all I did for the first 6 months with this team, other than just making sure we're getting the job done, was I just cared for this team. I started calling out the uniqueness in the people I was leading. I started encouraging them that behavior that's not going to happen anymore, because to be a healthy, unified, cohesive team, we can't act like that. You'll hear me say this a million times, but leadership's not just what you do, but what you allow. It's kind of back to the celebration thing. What are we going to allow? What are we going to celebrate? You can't just be held accountable for what decisions you make. If you let people make decisions and you don't hold them accountable, that's on you as well. And so with this team, and you guys, I'm not making this up, within a month, you would not have recognized that team, because all I did was go, hey, I want to hear your story. I want to know what's going on in your world. I want to care about the things you care about. I want to remove obstacles that are keeping you from being your best. And I want to learn about the past and what you didn't like about that, or what you did like, so that we can take what's best and we can move this thing into a new, better tomorrow. Every time I would care for people, it was always with some vision about where we're going. Every time I would honor the past, it was about caring for people. I was constantly in a state of evaluation. And every single bit of that was laid on this fruit of patience, being patient to make sure the team moves at the right speed. So that's a few things. I know, again, I try to keep things as simple as I can. So a couple questions came in. I want to answer those. And then if you have any other questions, we can do that. Maybe Stephanie will hop on and ask them. But one of the questions that came in, this person was saying that there's a couple people that they inherited that are not really qualified for the position, and they're not really buying into the new leadership. So how do we handle this aside from, and I like this, aside from praying and losing weight? That's an option. Praying is definitely still needs to be a part of this, because there's a dance of discernment like we talked about. I mentioned this earlier, but I believe that, and I really do believe this with all my heart, I want people to be successful. And sometimes them being successful is not with me. And so when I inherited one of the teams, I remember I had a couple players who were really devoted to the last leader, who really loved the culture that was created then, who really loved everything about it. And I remember saying to one of them, I knew it, and you, whoever asked this question, you probably know this too. I knew that this wasn't going to be a long-term thing, but I also have decided I would rather spend the extra time and coach somebody out of an organization instead of it just being a cold turkey, blindsided kind of thing. And so I went to after, about 3 months of just kind of getting my feet wet and making sure I'd evaluated well. I went to this person. I said, hey, there are two things that I need you to know. Number one, I'm never going to be the prior leader. You just need to know that. I'm not going to try to be them. I'm not going to act like them. I'm not going to do the things they did that you've so vocally expressed you like. And number two, these are the expectations from here on out to be a part of my team. And you need to pray over this next season, if you can do both of those things. Because if you can't, great. It's been a great run. We love you. You've done an excellent job. I'm just giving you the understanding that these are the things. I'm never going to be him. And this is what I'm going to hold you accountable for. And if it doesn't work, great. But I just don't want you frustrated all the time, simply because I'm stating for you, this is reality. And exactly what I thought was going to happen is they just decided I wasn't the leader they wanted to follow, and they didn't feel like they could stay with those standards. And so they decided to leave, and we were able to bring in somebody who fit with me better. Now, there are times that we can work with the people, and I think that's one of the leader's jobs, is to go, it's that discernment piece. I think they're workable. I think they're coachable. But as a leadership coach in my full-time job, if I get a client and I realize as I'm working with them that they're not coachable, I'm shutting down that relationship, because if you're not coachable, what are we doing? It's not even worth it. But if you are, and you're trying, and I can see that, even though we're not there yet, that might be somebody worth hanging on to. And then the other question that came, hopefully that's helpful. And then the last one was someone that came in, and what constantly comes back when people under the new leadership is people say, this is how we always do it. I hate that. So one of the things, I have a whole chapter in here about fresh eyes in the evaluation chapter or section. I used to tell staff members or new people, I'd say, hey, one of the things you need to know about being a part of our team is you're going to have fresh eyes just for so long. Like when you come in, I want you asking every question that comes to mind. I want you going, hey, so why is it that, we all sit in chairs instead of stand on treadmills, whatever the thing may be. And I said, if our answer to your question is ever, well, that's just how we do it, and we can't follow up that answer with an actual reason, then we got work to do. Then that's not a good answer. And so I would say to those, whoever wrote this too, about how do you change the mindset without insulting people who are always saying, I would just say, okay, great. And it seems like it's been successful. Help me understand, not that we've always done it this way, but why we believe and what fruit we've seen and how we know this is the best way to do things. And they very well might have a good answer, but if we can't articulate why that's a good answer or why we've always done it that way, then we probably need to reevaluate that. So that's a couple things that come to mind with that. Stephanie, I don't know if there's other questions that have come in, but those were a few. I'm really grateful for the time. And if there's any other questions, we can go from there.
All right, thank you. At this point in time, we don't have any other questions, but feel free, if you do have any, type them in right now while we just continue to wrap things up here. I was talking with another friend who's watching this webinar right now too, and we were both just kind of saying, oh my goodness, I feel like Tyler's talking directly to me right now. So even if it's not necessarily something we inherited, it's sometimes I think this stuff is just very valuable in general in life, regardless of the situation.
For sure.
So thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
All of this. Yeah. Okay, so I think we're probably not going to get any more questions right now, but if anyone does have any follow-up questions, either someone who attended today or someone who's going to be watching this later, what's the best way to get a hold of you and ask those questions, Tyler?
Yeah, probably just following me on social media and then sending me a DM or something. It's at Tyler Reagin, Reagin, and that's probably the easiest way to do that. And of course, Stephanie, I answer every single question in this book. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, yeah, we will include a link on our website as well for people to be able to purchase the book if they want to dig into that a little bit deeper. I think that'll be another great option too. So
there's one question there. You see that? Somebody says, where can you purchase it? Amazon's probably the best. I mean, any of the online retailers is the best way to do it.
Perfect.
And you can pre-order. That goes in. It'll be at your doorstep on March 2nd, next Tuesday.
All right. So there you go. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We are very excited to just have this opportunity to share some. I think this has been one of the topics that weighs on a lot of people in general. And so we're just very grateful to receive this wisdom and to have an opportunity to check out your book so that we can find out more about that.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Stephanie.
Okay. All right. Join us next month. We're going to connect with Luke Shipp from First Insurance Group, and he's going to share with us how to become more attractive to insurance companies from a risk management perspective. Quite a bit of a different focus shift on this one, but still a very important topic to make sure that we have a grounding on and understanding of. So subscribe today to learn more, and have a blessed day, everyone. We'll see you later. Bye.